I'm so pleased to welcome Vyckie Garrison. She started No Longer Quivering to tell the story of her escape from the Quiverfull movement. Quiverfull is a growing movement within evangelical Christianity which rejects all forms of birth control and emphasizes the biblical marriage model. And the reason I need to use those air quotes is because there's many biblical models, including the one where the woman, the widow, is forced to marry their brother-in-law. But the Quiverful movement gets its name from Psalm 127, which says, "As arrows in the hand of a mighty man are, so are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who has his quiver full of them." The Quiverful movement may not seem like a threat to you, but it was to me. Many of my childhood friends from the same church I went to are living that lifestyle today, and their homeschooled girls are graduating and looking forward to perpetuating the pattern, having been shielded from all other options. Vyckie Garrison's No Longer Quivering has developed into a valuable resource of information regarding the deceptions and dangers of the Quiverful philosophy and lifestyle.
I was worried that I was going to be nervous, but mostly I'm just tired. This has been a great weekend, and I just really appreciate the Pennsylvania State Atheists and Humanists for putting on this conference. Everything has been really wonderful. Okay. And I'm going to try not to spoil the mood of the fun that we've been having here with my topic, because it can be kind of overwhelming and depressing at times, but I try to have fun with it, because otherwise I just, it can be discouraging. And I promise that I'm not actually trying to troll you, but I am planning to take you on a ride on an emotional roller coaster called spiritual abuse. I want to talk to you today about a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. and just hold on to your seats and don't hear me out for a minute before you just slam the door in my face, because I have good news for you. Wait, what's that? You're saying you've already been there and done that, and you think you might know more about the Bible than I do, but now you have reasons not to believe, and you're an atheist? Wow, you must have a lot of faith. I mean, you might not want to admit it, but I know that deep in your heart you know the truth, that God exists and that He's real and He's going to judge you one day. No? So you're trying to tell me that you actually hate God and you'd rather worship Satan? I mean, obviously you were never a true Christian. And I just want to, apologize. I'm really sorry if somebody who was claiming to be a Christian hurt you and turned you into a bitter, angry atheist with no real meaning and purpose in your life. But I just want to encourage you, please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Does all of this sound like annoyingly familiar? I thought it might, because I hear this bullshit all the time. Whenever I tell the story of my escape from the Quiverful movement, Christians just immediately dismiss my experience of spiritual abuse by saying, well, your problem wasn't really with Jesus or with Christianity. Your real problem was that you were following an extreme legalistic cult. It's very frustrating, it's very annoying. And so that's why I want to talk to you today about a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. But before I get started, I want to give a heads up for anyone in the audience who, like me, can't read Bible verses without risking a panic attack. In order to make an important point, I will be putting verses up on the screen. And if that could cause a problem for you, I will not think any less of you if you just don't read them. Because I understand if you were one of the unfortunate ones who didn't just take the preacher's word for it, and you actually did look these things up, you read the Bible for yourself, then you already know I'm not taking this stuff out of context. Unless you consider that the entire Bible is out of context and doesn't actually apply to life in the 21st century. That's supposed to be me. I was in a personal relationship with Jesus Christ for over 25 years, and I am here to warn you that this guy is seriously bad news for anyone who loves him. And rather than start at the beginning, I'm going to spare you the long story and just skip straight to the breakup. So the end of my life as the Bride of Christ came after a visit to Bright Horizons, which is the local domestic violence shelter in my hometown of Norfolk, Nebraska. I went there to get help in filling out a restraining order against my husband, whose emotional and mental abuse against me and the children had escalated to the point that I was in the midst of a complete mental and physical breakdown. When I got to the shelter, they gave me a form. I should say first that he had taken 6 of our 7 kids to a town 3 hours away, and he was preventing me from having any contact with them unless I agreed to his terms for our reconciliation. So I went to this shelter, and they gave me the form to complete, and I wrote 3 pages trying to describe the situation in our home. And after reading everything that I wrote, the volunteer, she said, you know, the judge won't grant you a protection order against your husband unless you actually accuse him of abuse. And I tried to explain that I didn't really think that my husband was technically abusive. And I had no doubt that he really loved me and the kids. He always put us first. He basically centered his entire life around us. And we were a good Christian family. The Bible commands husbands to love your wives as Christ loved the church. And that's the sort of godly man that I was married to. He was a true patriarch who ruled his home according to godly principles. We had studied the Bible very carefully, and we knew so much about biblical family values that we felt qualified to teach others via our pro-life, pro-family newspaper, the Nebraska Family Times. In 2003, we were honored as the Nebraska Family of the Year, and that was through Nebraska Family Council, and it was in recognition of our work in helping to get DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, passed in Nebraska. And that's not something that I am in any way, proud of at this point. But at the time, being named Family of the Year, that was enough to convince me that we were on the right track so far as marriage and family is concerned. I had become somewhat of a leader in what is now known as the Quiverfull movement, and that is Christian fundamentalist families who take seriously the Bible teachings about marriage and family, and they're putting that into practice in their lives. Probably the most recognizable and influential Quiverful family in America today is the Duggar family of way too many kids and counting. And unlike fundamentalist Mormons who tend to congregate in just a few places like Utah, Arizona, Texas, and Colorado, you can find Quiverful families in just about every community and in almost all the churches. And this is because Quiverful is not a denomination with a creed to sign and a church to join. And it's not technically a cult in the strict sense of having one central leader. But instead, Quiverful is more of a mindset. It's like this very powerful head trip in which each family becomes a cult unto itself, with Daddy enshrined as the supreme patriarch. Based on a literalist interpretation of Psalm 127, Quiverful believers reject all forms of birth control. They have a very high regard for the patriarchal family model of the Old Testament, which emphasizes hierarchy and authority and very strict gender roles for men and women and boys and girls. And the reason that I say, you can find Quiverful families just about anywhere is because the teachings of Quiverful are not actually an extreme deviation from traditional Christian teachings regarding marriage and family. It's my contention that Quiverful is regular Christianity writ large and lived out to its logical conclusions. And if you're feeling a little skeptical about whether the majority of Christians actually believe that using birth control is a sin, just ask yourself, why is it that the Christian right just freaks out whenever they have to think about including contraceptive coverage in a health insurance plans? Whatever reasons the Christians will give you for why they don't want to pay for birth control, those are basically the same reasons why Quiverful families are leaving their family planning up to God. Drink of water. So whereas the average Christian doesn't want you to have access to birth control, Quiverful families are unhypocritically applying that same standard in their own lives. We proudly embraced the idea of headship and submission, which is taught in the Bible. We believed, as the Bible teaches, that it is the man who is ultimately responsible for the spiritual well-being of his wife and family, and who must one day stand before his Creator and give an account. And my husband understood this, and he took it very seriously, which is why he tried so hard to be a good, godly leader in our home. So the lady at the shelter, she says, so if he's such a great, loving husband and father, what are you doing here? Why do you need a protection order? I tried to explain to her that despite how hard we both were trying to live according to Christian principles, our home had become this oppressive, miserable place in which none of us were happy, and it felt like we were all losing our minds. And the problem is, everything that I knew about love and relationships had been so thoroughly redefined by Christian teachings that I didn't have the language to name the abuse. That's why I could write 3 pages. And she's like, so what's the problem? So I went to therapy. One of the first things that my counselor, Deb, showed me is this power and control wheel, which is an effective tool for helping abuse victims recognize ways in which they are being manipulated, exploited, mistreated, and enslaved. And I'm going to go over this wheel real quick, just to introduce it for anyone who isn't already familiar. And if it seems like I'm going too fast, you're not catching it, don't worry, because I'll go back. Emotional abuse involves put-downs, name-calling, making the victim feel worthless. Intimidation is used to make the victim fear her abuser. Isolation involves controlling or severely restricting access to outside relationships and information. Minimizing, denying, and blaming. This is to make the victim feel like she deserves the abuse, that it's all her fault, that she was this crazy one. Using children is an effective way to make sure that the woman stays invested in maintaining that relationship at all costs for the children's sake.
Excuse me, can you brighten that a little? I really can't see. I can't see where it says using children.
I can't do anything about that.
Oh, okay.
Darn. Sorry about that.
Keep going.
Male privilege, of course. Economic abuse. The victim is kept financially dependent so that she couldn't get out of the relationship if she wanted to. And eventually, the abuse escalates to the point of coercion and threats and actual physical violence. So after going over this power and control wheel just briefly with Deb, I said to her, well, yeah, all of that is present in my marriage. It's just that we had different names for these things. We had chapter and verse to teach us that power and control is actually good and godly. We called it agape love. And it's the kind of love that God has for His creation. It's supposed to be the model for our marriage as husband and wife. For example, emotional abuse involves put downs, name calling. And I told Deb, I was like, well, he would never do that. And there's really no need, because I was already fully aware of my inherently sinful nature and of my desperately wicked heart. He didn't have to remind me that my very best efforts were like filthy rags compared to God's holiness. Plus, I understood that as a woman, I was particularly susceptible to deception by Satan. I don't know how many times when we were discussing an important decision that my husband would say, you know, what you're saying, it sounds reasonable, it sounds good to me, but how do I know that Satan's not just trying to use you to deceive me? Well, according to the Bible, it was very likely that Satan was using me. And as a good Christian woman, the last thing that I wanted was to be accused of having this Jezebel spirit. Intimidation creates fear. How can fear be a bad thing when the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom? Was I afraid of my husband? I mean, not in any physical sense, but I was always hesitant to contradict or disrespect him in any way because God had placed him in a position of authority over me. And God-given authorities are considered as umbrellas of protection. By submitting to her husband's authority, a woman, a wife, enjoys the privileges of his spiritual protection. And if she resists his authority, then she is forfeiting that protection, not only for herself, but also for her children. And, you know, I got this off of one of the Quiverful websites, and the little cartoon makes it sound really silly. But if you actually understand this concept and you take it seriously, it can be very intimidating. My husband didn't intentionally isolate us. It just kind of happened as a natural progression as we became more and more devoted and sold out for Jesus. First, I dropped out of college and I quit my job so that I could be a keeper at home like the Bible commands. And over time, we cut out all meaningful associations with unbelievers, with what we considered pew-warmer Christians, and even with our extended family who didn't share our enthusiasm for righteous living. We taught our children at home in order to protect them from the godless humanism that we thought was the religion being taught in the public schools. I got this graphic off of an actual website called To Love, Honor, and Vacuum. We eventually got to the point where we were so biblical that we felt that Independent Fundamental Baptist Church in our hometown was too compromising, too sold out. And so we ended up home churching with a couple of like-minded families who were also leaving their family planning up to God and homeschooling their many children. Minimizing, denying, and blaming. This one was easy for me because in light of eternity, whatever hardship or suffering or adversity that I might face as a result of my commitment to live wholeheartedly for Jesus was just light and momentary. I mean, yeah, there were times when submitting to my husband's authority was a hassle. And yes, the pregnancies almost killed me every time. But if I thought that almost dying was bad, just imagine how much worse Jesus had it. Because he actually died. Motherhood was my mission field, and Christian missionaries often risked their lives in order to spread the gospel. And so I felt that, and I was promised that if I did die in childbirth, well then just like those missionaries, when I got to heaven, I would be given a martyr's crown. Using children didn't really ring true to me. I mean, we all know that Jesus loves the little children. And the whole reason that we were knocking ourselves out trying to live according to these biblical principles, and it's a harsh, demanding lifestyle, but the only reason we were willing to do that is because we wanted to provide a safe, loving home to raise our children. So I told Deb, I said, using children, I don't think that one really applies. I mean, except for the part where if you use any form of birth control, that's tantamount to playing God. And so I was kept either pregnant or nursing or both for more than 11 years. This verse in Psalm 127, it says, "Happy is the man who has his quiver full of them." And it goes on to say, he will not be ashamed, but he will speak with his enemies in the gate. And we were taught that in biblical times, the city gate was where the male leadership of the town would meet to make important decisions regarding local government. So the whole point of having this quiver full of children was, first of all, to outpopulate the enemy. And that'd be all of you. And secondly, we were going to shoot those arrows straight into the heart of the enemy. And by that, we meant that our children would grow up to be leaders in all of the major institutions. This was our plan for taking back America for God. So children are arrows, which is the ammunition in God's holy war. So yeah, using children, put a great big check mark next to that one. And for those of you who are curious, but too polite to ask what it's like for these Quiverful wives who are breeding like rabbits, I have a little story for you. So a guy bunny meets a lady bunny out in the field, and he says to her, "This won't take long, did it?" my kids hate it when I tell that joke. They're like, TMI. I wouldn't say that my husband used male privilege to control me and the kids. Male privilege was his rightful position. You know, Jesus, where'd my slide go? Yeah. I can't do this without my slides. Dang it. That sucks. Darn. Can you look on there and find it for me? I'll keep going, but it's on there several times, the picture of his wife. Anyway, I mean, Jesus was given all authority by his Heavenly Father. And we believe that in the same way, authority is given to earthly fathers. And so even though I had heard that absolute power corrupts absolutely, I didn't really think that God-given authority could be abused, because greater love has no man than this, that he lay down his life for a friend. And that was the kind of leadership that Jesus exemplified, and so leader. And so we believe that while the man was privileged with greater authority, he was also burdened with extra responsibility, with ultimate responsibility. And so really the wife and children's absolute dependence was more of a hardship for the man than it was for those who he had God-given dominion over. Not finding it. love has no man in this, right? So, economic abuse, I mean, of course, finances were always tight, but I mean, it was not any picnic for my husband either. He had to raise 7 kids and support us. But, you know, we had these promises. My God will supply all your needs, and I have never seen a righteous man forsaken or his children begging for bread. So really it was just a matter of trusting God and careful money management. God always supplied for our needs financially. Like the time that he led me to deliver my 5th baby at home with just a midwife. And never mind that I had health issues, which led my first 4 babies being delivered by C-section in the hospital. The baby and I both survived, and we saved a ton of money. So I couldn't even imagine what could make more sense than God's financial plan. Coercion and threats. I told Deb he never threatened me. And in fact, I willingly went along with all of the harsh demands of the Quiverful lifestyle. And in many instances, I was the one who pushed patriarchy and headship on him. Why would I do that? Because I believe that our family had an enemy who was eager to kill, steal, and destroy our souls and our children's souls for all eternity. And our only hope for protection from spiritual disaster was to remain steadfastly in this one little secret spot of safety, which Corrie ten Boom called the hiding place. The hiding place isn't any particular location. Instead, it is a very specific, very narrow position that's located directly in the center of God's will. There and only there could we safely trust in his protection. So he didn't need to raise his voice in order to keep myself and the children in place. All he had to do, and when he did raise his voice, you know, that was just speaking the truth in love. And when he constantly criticized and complained about all of the ways in which we failed to live up to God's perfect standard, well, he was just hating the sin, but loving the sinner. And he didn't have to brandish a weapon in order to control all of our behaviors and even our thoughts and our emotions. All he had to do was fulfill his role as godly patriarch and to love us the way Christ loves the church. After going over all of these aspects of the power and control wheel, I was ready to admit that I was involved in an abusive relationship. And I told my counselor, I said, I want out. And Deb said to me, you have to protect yourself and your children. She said, you need to divorce this man. And she was talking about my husband, and I was thinking, well, yeah, him too. I did file for divorce and rescued myself and my kids from the tyranny of patriarchy. But for me, the primary breakup was with Jesus. You see, being in a personal relationship with Jesus Christ is a setup for dysfunctional game playing and crazy making head trips. According to Christianity, Jesus submitted himself to torture and death in order that we could have the free gift of eternal life. And by free, he means it's only going to cost you everything you have and everything you are. When the very definition of perfect love involves martyring yourself and sacrificing your children, there is no place for emotionally healthy concepts like boundaries and consent and equality and mutuality. I could not say that my husband's patriarchal behavior was abusive so long as I was committed to being in a relationship with the big guy who exemplifies the abusive bully and who commands his followers to imitate his very warped and twisted idea of love. So here's my website, No Longer Quivering. If you like Twitter drama, you can follow me because I have a great time trolling the true Christians. Do I have time for questions?
Questions.
Yep. All right.
Do you still communicate with your children? Are they still part of the movement, or are they split?
I got my children. I brought them all out with me. Yeah, and they are. I have a 16-year-old son who I call him obnoxiously atheist. That's his identity. None of them are Christians or even remotely so anymore. So, and we're having a great time. I like my kids a lot more now than I ever did when I had to control every aspect of their life.
I'd just like to say, as a 74-year-old woman who was born into what was called moral rearmament, and then became well with people, and we smiled and spread word. And I was actually in an abusive marriage and didn't realize it. And suddenly today, I realized what I could have changed about my life and didn't. And thanks to Dan Barker and Christopher Hitchens, etc., I'm here today, but I really, really appreciate what you said, Nicole. And the trick is now, how do we help young women who are so absorbed? And I live in an Amish community. I'd like to provide an Amish place to get out for the women in that community.
I mean, No Longer Quivering is a good place to start. It is not, at this point, we've been around for about 5 years now, and it is not just strictly Quiverful. We have Mormons who come just, from every little branch of craziness. Everybody that's drunk the Kool-Aid, it's like, come here and we will sober you up. Thank you.
I wasn't raised Quiverful, but all of my friends were. My parents sort of got in on that movement a little late after being sterilized. Just saying, I was homeschooled until I was an adult, and then I went to a very Christian college. And it's been very interesting looking at how my friends turned out. About a third of them ended up following in, maybe half. If I look back on my high school pictures, and I'm 23, and all of them are married, 75% have kids, more than one kid at this point. But even so, like about a third of them have followed what their parents are saying, and then 2/3, like, there's some major problems with what we grew up being taught. Like, Homeschoolers Anonymous is being widely talked about in my circle of homeschool alumni friends.
Homeschoolers Anonymous are awesome. The kids that are raised in this, they're getting to the point they got internet access, and they're starting to figure out what's happened to them, how their lives were just basically, taken from them. Because in Quiverful, a child, even before they're born, their life is prepackaged and given to them chapter and verse. This is how, this is God's plan for your life. And so when they get out of that, they're pissed. and they've got this energy and this enthusiasm, and they're going after, the institutions and the people who are promoting this, and they've got the Quiverful fundamentalist community just shaking in their boots.
It's really interesting, just from a couple of years speaking out against a lot of propaganda that a lot of money has gone into speaking about our experiences and finally getting to a point where we're being heard by different organizations. I'm not part of Homeschoolers Anonymous, but I kind of strongly with it. And then there's the other thing. Oh, just can't remember. So, another thing is that a lot of people who, especially the girls who grew up in this movement, end up with a lot of mental health issues, and I was one who sort of grew up in this movement, and I had a lot of mental health problems. And another thing is, let's see here, okay, it's coming back. So it seems that one of the main problems was that the parents' worth was all centered around how the children ended up in the end, because of the whole thing. If you train a child in the way he should go when he's old, well, not argument. So their children having mental health issues, eating disorders, etc., whereas
that means that their mom and dad need to get their heart right with God.
Yeah, so everything was hidden, everything was kept quiet. I became very physically ill when I was 15, and my debate partner actually, she was like, I didn't know you were sick whenever you were that old. I just thought you had like colds a lot, which is what my parents sort of put out to there. So and it also seems like a lot of the movement for patriarchy seems to come from mothers, and that they're a lot more interconnected, and there's a lot of the social network that they do have just reinforces that belief. And it's much stronger and more interconnected than sort of men's social network.
Well, I'm glad you were able to come, Sarah, and I'm glad that you are aware of Homeschoolers Anonymous and the support that they have online, because it's a great resource.
Last question, please.
I'm assuming that like all of the church has shunned you. Are there any people that you considered friends that have tried to contact you? No.
Mostly they just tried to ignore me. I had one, because I wrote for several of the pro-Quiverfull publications around the country, and I had become friends with these people, and I had one who writes a magazine called Unless the Lord magazine, I believe. And she wrote an editorial, and she said, my friend died a spiritual death, which is the most horrible death of all. So I'm like, whatever, I'm feeling pretty good.